Our first panelist today is Nadia Bunyan. Nadia is the creative director and fashion designer at Maison Blackman. So I'll now pass it on to you, Nadia, and you have 2 minutes for a presentation, and you may start.
Hi, everyone. I actually am the co-founder of Growing Arc, a nonprofit that uses the farm to closet process to discuss sustainability and to have community action on sustainability. My background is as a fashion designer where I spent 20 years within the industry, the last 7 years focused on sustainability, but really found that within the industry it was very difficult to think about or consider what sustainability could look like or be, or even for folks to imagine that for the future. That led me to co-found this nonprofit and growing ARC standing for Activate, Reciprocate, Cultivate, really thinking about this as our theory of change and ways that we can help people to understand and build awareness and education on different aspects of sustainability, but also to have a relational understanding of what sustainability is. So not just this concept of recycling and um, using better fabrics, but also understanding the relationships that exist within society and the interconnectedness within our world, the different dynamics, whether they be social, environmental, or economic, that are really all a part of sustainability. So when we talk about the farm to closet process, what does that mean? We have different gardens and grow spaces, farms where we grow material and dye plants. We have one in a major park within the city of Montreal. And then we also have two gardens in collaboration with different community organizations where we grow food and textile crops. Within these spaces, each of these spaces, we are really creating an invitation for different communities to come together and learn about different material practices as a portal or a path to discuss sustainability. Clothing is something that we all wear, we engage with it every day. So for Growing Arc, it really is an accessible way to discuss sustainability and how we can move forward and create change.
Okay, Nadia, so the fashion industry is one of the largest contributors to global waste. So, from your perspective as a creative professional working in fashion and sustainability, how can zero waste practices in fashion help transform waste into economic opportunity for communities?
There we go. So how can they change? There are many things that can be done, and I think there are many things that the industry is trying to employ. However, a lot of the zero waste practices and things that try to be implemented in the context of the fashion industry or any industry is overshadowed by the current economic system that we live in. It's very hard for a brand, any brand or any company to implement certain zero waste practices when it's actually not cost effective within those spaces. So without certain policy changes to help level that playing field, without cultural shift in terms of the practice of sustainability, and without consumer demand, it's pretty hard. But there are things that I think can happen, and I think the opportunities really start with investing in your local communities. I think that for anybody within fashion, we look at fashion as being this huge, big, global, international space, but fashion actually happens very locally. It happens at home. And when we reinforce and build local infrastructures that support the production of garments and clothing, and again, talking about the farm to the closet, when we can build those infrastructures locally, then we are then increasing and adding and reinvesting in our communities and adding to the infrastructure there and building the economic opportunities at home. The other thing to understand that with zero waste, it's actually a reduction in costs. And when we have the right policies in place, we support that. Currently, it's much less expensive for a company to overbuy the textiles that they need, which leads to an overproduction of textiles, and then to create clothing in these huge production runs due to economies of scale. But it's actually less expensive when we purchase less, we produce less, and then there's less waste to go around. So how can the governments really put in policies that help with that? Internationally, France and certain countries in Europe are starting to do that, and we really need to see more of that locally as well. Because without these types of structures, without these supports and these things can't happen. Yeah.
That was great. So I got you like need to invest in local economies, build local infrastructures, and right policy in place, right? Those are the key things like, oh, and it's really true. And yes, you see like clothes everywhere, clothes everywhere, and you're like, what do you do? That's waste generation. What are you going to do with all that? Neat, but then GDP, purchase more, better for the economy, right?
Okay,
Yeah. So thank you.
welcome.
How can cultural storytelling and creative expression encourage people to rethink how they buy, wear, and use clothing?
I think of clothing as um, a pathway to relationality and an archive of our existence. And with the activities that we do through the nonprofit Growing Arc, which we call play dates, we're really getting people to engage with textiles and fibers and clothing on this relational level, thinking about where the fibers come from, so directly working in a garden or a farm, and then transforming the things that we cultivate within these spaces. It gives people insight as to the story of the garment, really how the fibers would have been grown, then transformed. So thinking about the hands, the people, their stories, their lives, the communities that these clothing would have been taken care of it and produced in. But then also when the clothes are transported and come to another country, what is the story for you of that garment when you go and you purchase it in a store? What does it say to you about your life? How do you feel with this garment? Clothing as a part of material culture also gives us insight as to what were the technologies, the access to materials that we have, and a way to imagine and think about the future. And really, when we're in spaces when we can have these broader conversations about clothing as part of an overall understanding of material culture, we are engaging with all of these stories, all of this background knowledge, all of this history context. And I think that's what makes clothing and material culture so important, and really as part of an overall understanding of story. And story, when we have this relational understanding, is really what opens us up to sustainability. Because if we don't have a connection to the story of our garments, the places they come from, the people who participated in making the garment, realizing that aspect, understanding that social process of doing that exists, if we don't have that connection, then how are we really supposed to engage in sustainability? I think it's fundamental to anything moving forward and to create the cultural shift that we know is needed.
Wow, that's interesting. So knowing where your fiber comes from. The story is knowing where your food comes from. But see, knowing where your fiber comes from, the materials where they come from, that's really interesting. Thank you for that. Now, if we were to fully embrace secular fashion system, right? So repairing, sharing, upcycling, and reusing clothing, right? What kind of social and environmental benefits will communities expect to see?
I think you're going to see the kind of world that not only is sustainable, but participates in the regeneration and an acknowledgement that human beings are not separate from nature. Everything is connected. And when you look at a system like clothing, and take that, look at the how that can be a circular way of being, those are things that used to exist when we had societies that were much more rural and people were, living in terms of the subsistence living, even in Canada, on these homes, people were growing the fibers that they needed for their homes and the food. And there was this concept of waste does not exist. Everything had to be used. We think about that, to what was being said before about low income settings. Folks didn't have a lot, but they had so much ingenuity because they were working with what they had and they had a better balance of life. Um, I think I think that if we could move to a space, really truly create systems that were circular and worked within those concepts, I think that would change our whole perspective and viewpoint on what a good life is. Um, what would it look like? What would repairing, sharing, upcycling? I think you're looking at small local communities. I think you're looking at living in spaces where um, knowledge is specific and local. I think we're understanding that this notion of universality doesn't actually work. It doesn't work when we need to think about what makes sense for a given community. I think these are the things that need to be taken into consideration when we're thinking about what circularity looks like. It can't be the same everywhere because we don't all have the same conditions, we don't all have the same circumstances. But we all want, I think, we all want to have better lives and better existences and better futures. So what does it look like? It looks like communities that care about each other. And it looks like people in deep relationships with themselves and the environments around them.
That's great. Thanks, Nadia. That's really that would be it would be beautiful to see. That would be great to see.